Although elements of the genre have existed in video games since the early 80s, the term survival horror wasn't actually coined until 1996 with the release of Resident Evil. Inspired by the likes of 1989's Sweet Home and 1992's Alone in the Dark, Resident Evil's success inspired what many referred to as the golden age of survival horror, with titles like Silent Hill and Fatal Frame gaining huge fan bases of their own. As with all things, however, they aren't all winners, so for this list, we've trawled through the murkiest depths of game rankings and Metacritic to find the biggest skid marks on the underpants of survival horror. Ooh, horrible metaphor. We've excluded fan-made games, mods, and anything that hasn't garnered enough reviews to get an average on either site, so there will be some ploppers indie games that we won't be including. Finally, the actual term survival horror is open to interpretation, so for the sake of consistency, if it looks like survival horror and Wikipedia says it barks thusly, it's eligible for this list. With all that out the way, I'm the moderately spooky Peter from TripleJump, and here are the 10 worst reviewed survival horror games of all time. Number 10. Alone in the Dark 2008, 39%. Remember earlier when we said Alone in the Dark was one of the inspirations for the game that started the whole survival horror trend? Well, it's because of this utter tosh that we felt it necessary to include a load of dates alongside the titles mentioned in the intro, lest the 1992 version be mistaken for such tripe. Although the PC, Xbox 360 and PS3 versions of Alone in the Dark's remake managed scores of anywhere up to a very nice 69%. The Wii release scraped an abysmal 39 out of 100. Critics lambasted the game's convoluted plot, numerous bugs, and, on the Wii version in particular, awful controls. Not ones to take criticism lying down, Atari hit back, threatening the websites responsible for the harsh reviews with lawsuits, claiming they couldn't have possibly critiqued the finished game as no advanced copies had been sent out, so the publications in question must have illegally downloaded shoddy versions. It turned out, though, that rather embarrassingly for Atari, some execs had in fact sent out actual review copies, and the publisher was left looking rather silly. Oh well, at least the follow-up, Alone in the Dark Illumination, had a bit more success. Oh my god, it's a dumpster fire! Number 9. Ju-On, The Grudge, 39%. Ju-On, The Grudge, the movie is, by all accounts, an okay horror film. It's certainly not groundbreaking in the way that the likes of Psycho or The Exorcist were, but it's a spooky enough hour and a half for those who like a little fright. Ju-On, The Grudge, the movie, the video game, Haunted House Simulator, on the other hand, is, as one critic put it, a great idea marred by middling execution. The ingredients really were all there for this one. Across several episodes, you play as a different member of the Yamada family, each facing the curse that has befallen them, armed with nothing but a flashlight. The first major complaint was the game's length, which no one appreciated, on the grounds that the title was being sold for full price, whilst boasting a runtime of under 4 hours. The second big problem was that age-old chestnut, the Wii's controls. For reasons best known to the developer, the decision was taken to not use the nunchuck, so gamers were left to awkwardly control their character's movement with the Wiimote buttons, whilst using the motion controls to move the flashlight. After achieving an average of just 39% on Metacritic, we're sorry to say that this is one grudge we will not be keeping hold of. Number 8. Vampire Reign, 38%. Don't get us wrong, we've got nothing against games that prove to be a bit of a challenge, and very few things get Ben Potter as excited as the prospect of a new decent Souls-like. But when a game comes along that's just hard for the sake of being hard, we're forced to draw the line. This was the main criticism levelled at 2007's Vampire Reign, a game of stealth, spooks, and surprise, vampires. In the vast majority of survival horror games, even if a level calls for a player to remain unseen, there is some kind of mechanic that comes into play if an enemy inadvertently spots you, be it a combat system of some kind, or even just the ability to run and hide. Vampire Rain did not include such a mechanic though, so if you were discovered by an adversary, it was pretty much game over. What fun! In addition to the gameplay being absolute nails, the controls were clunky, the story was boring, and the AI was stupid to the point that you could stand right next to the Nightwalkers, and as long as you weren't in their peripheral vision, they couldn't sense you. Some compliments were paid to Vampire Rain's artwork and soundtrack, but sadly, this small amount of glitter wasn't enough to disguise such a massive turd. Number 7. Escape from Bug Island, 37%. I'd have liked to make a joke here about how the only bugs we wanted to escape from are the various ones that impact Escape from Bug Island's gameplay, but it turns out the glitches are one of the few things that critics didn't end up complaining about here. Well, that's a shame. Released in 2006 for, again, the Nintendo Wii, Escape from Bug Island basically has nothing going for it. Despite making its way to console in the mid-2000s, the game's environmental graphics wouldn't have looked out of place on the PS1, and it goes without saying, because Nintendo Wii, that the controls are clunky at best. The story, in which the protagonist has followed his crush to an island to study bugs along with their mate who also fancies her, reads like it's been written by a 12-year-old, and to add insult to injury, a twist that I won't spoil because I know you're just itching to experience it yourself, forces you to go back and play half the game again. I hate my life. Achieving a dismal score of just 37 on Metacritic, it's fair to say that we won't feel bad about unleashing the raid on this bug. Number 6. The Ring: Terror's Realm, 35%. The sad reality of Resident Evil's success is that everything dubbed survival horror that has followed since draws some sort of comparison. This is really rather unfortunate for The Ring: Terror's Realm, because it clearly tried so hard to imitate everything that Resident Evil did well, yet failed miserably in its execution. Based on a series of novels by Japanese author Koji Suzuki, The Ring: Terror's Realm centers around a string of mysterious deaths connected only by a computer program. Regrettably, what could have been a very intriguing plot was completely ruined by horrendous writing. And in a genre where good storytelling is key, it means we're off to a shaky start. Aside from its crap narrative, The Ring: Terror's Realm was also criticised for its painful controls, its protagonist's unwillingness to break into so much as a jog, and enemies that can only be described as utter idiots, with the vast majority providing nothing even nearing a challenge. Not even the puzzles could save this utter sham of a game, with most players giving up due to the general lack of directions given. You'd genuinely have more fun watching that spooky tape from the movies. I mean, at least that thing's scary. Number 5. 7 Days to Die, 35%. As low as the Metacritic score is for 7 Days to Die, a pitiful 35 for the Xbox One version, it is with a pang of guilt that we include it on this list. And the reason for that is thus. 7 Days to Die, if played on a PC, is actually pretty damn good. Although not the best survival horror game you'll ever play, it provides a satisfying post-apocalyptic experience for anyone that's ever thought that they'd be fine if zombies did overrun the planet. With that said, however, the console versions did not fare so well with critics, who had less than complimentary things to say about more or less everything it had to offer. The main issue with the console editions of 7 Days to Die is the user interface, which has quite clearly been copy-pasted from the PC version. For the vast majority of the game, it's an irritant, but when you're facing down a horde of zombies and your weapon is broken, it's a downright liability. Critics also panned the game's repetitiveness, graphics which looked incredibly dated, and the general lack of threat posed by individual zombies, making the game feel more like survival with horror elements than survival horror. 7 Days to Die? More like seven ways to fluff up a console port. Am I right? Am I right? No! Number 4. Agony, 34%. I don't think I've ever come across a title for a video game that's quite as apt as Agony, because honestly, this one is just painful to play. Sitting at a rather excruciating average of just 34% on Metacritic, Agony tells the story, note the heavy quotation marks there, of some unnamed soul that's been banished to hell for reasons that are never really explained and seeks to escape, because well, I guess you just would, wouldn't you? The main issue with Agony is that it puts all of its eggs firmly in the shock value basket. But the problem is that the gore, Wilson, and bum parade never lets up, and the game fails to recognise that pausing its attempts to traumatise the audience every so often might actually mean they're surprised the next time something grim happens. Sadly, shock and disgust are really the only cards that Agony has in its hand, and when you take those away, you're left with little to no narrative, boring gameplay mechanics that boil down to flee, hide, wait, repeat, ad infinitum, and to top it all off, it doesn't even run well. Right, if you'll excuse me, I'm off to do something less unpleasant, like getting all of my teeth pulled out, sans anesthetic. Number 3. Drooner Morbus Gravis, 26%. Being the good boys and girls that we are here at TripleJump, we were very much unfamiliar with Paolo Ellioteri Serpieri and his Drooner series of comic books, as you can probably tell by my pronunciation guesswork, which centre around the often quite naughty exploits of the eponymous heroine. We're told, however, that if you're into that sort of thing, the collection of graphic novels is really quite the masterpiece.
Moving along!
Drooner Morbus Gravis, on the other hand, is, to its source material, what a wet fart is to Michelangelo's David. One of the criticisms thrown Morbus Gravis' way is its lack of faithfulness to Serpieri's works. That said, having seen examples, for research purposes only, we can kind of understand why the game would need to, tone things down a bit. Even if it did manage to capture the spirit of the comics, however, the game is plagued by poor graphics, unresponsive controls, and rage-inducing time limits on levels. Not only this, but we can only assume that the save feature was dreamed up by an absolute lunatic, considering it will send you back to the beginning of the game if you try to use it when Drooner's nervous tension is too high. At best, fans of the comics might get something out of the game, but in all honesty, even that is going to be a stretch. Number 2. Amy, 25%. Released to the Xbox Live Arcade and PS3 back in 2012, Amy is the story of protagonist Lara's attempts to escort a young girl from a city overrun by a mysterious plague. And I'm certain by now that you can guess to which game most journalists compared it. Rather than learning from the Resident Evil 4 guide to making a great game, however, developer VectorCell clearly took one look at the manual, covered it in petrol, lit it on fire, and then proceeded to dance on its smouldering ashes. Amy is, first and foremost, fundamentally broken, especially in terms of combat, wherein any attempts to engage a wooden plank with an enemy's skull have a seemingly random chance of success. Many players also found the game would freeze up in the middle of tense moments, completely breaking their immersion, and one critic even managed to get himself stuck in a toilet. If that's not a metaphor for playing this game, I don't know what is. Even beyond its various bugs and glitches, however, Amy is still a basically unplayable game, with a half-arsed narrative, uninspired puzzles, and a bunch of voice actors that clearly couldn't care less. Do yourself a favour and play Resi 4 instead. You will very much thank me for it. And number 1, Black Soul, 22%. A word of caution to any developer looking to pay homage to Resident Evil. Don't. We've already seen several examples on this list of games that have tried to draw from the 1996 title, only to fall flat on their faces. But perhaps the most egregious of the lot of them, at least according to the critics, is 2013's Black Soul. I'd like to call Black Soul a Resident Evil clone without shame, but that would somewhat imply that it actually copies its inspiration successfully. Instead, Black Soul is somewhat closer to the acid-vomiting mutated thing that Jeff Goldblum becomes in The Fly. Credit to Black Soul, it gives everything a good go, from the tank controls to the cinematic camera angles, but it just misses the mark on all it attempts, and we're left with characters that are difficult to control and a camera that ends up half obscured most of the time. The game even takes a crack at puzzles, but half of them are so lazy that the solution is basically spelled out for you, and the other half are either completely incomprehensible or just flat out broken. Ultimately, Black Soul is an abject failure, not only as an attempt at survival horror, but as a video game in general. And the only thing scary about that is the hole it will leave in your wallet. Ooh, sweet dreams.